You're listening to Ember Weekend, your weekend recap of all things Ember. This is episode 32. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson, and we're here to keep you in the Ember Run Loop. We're broadcasting from HashRocket HQ. It's October 26th, and today's episode is called I Heart EmberNYC.
So Friday afternoon, we launched our blog. This is the blog that we live coded.
Yay! Sorry, can I not yay in the middle of your talking? Yay!
Just keep yaying, yay, like the whole time. Just one yay all the way through.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited about the blog. I gotta say, I'm excited.
I'm excited too. I'm excited because we literally have to do no effort to blog now.
Yeah, Jake did all the work for us. It's great.
Yeah, TIL works great as a database.
Yeah, and we were lucky enough to get design help from Rye Mason yet again. Sponsored by HashRocket. She was actually allotted some time to work on it for us, which was pretty great. And the work, I think, turned out really, really good, especially considering we had some kind of bizarre constraints around, pulling out the HTML from TIL. We are getting already parsed Markdown, so it's just raw HTML straight out of a gem called Rouge, which actually Rouge doesn't support ES6. That's a side note. So we have some weird things that we have to tweak about getting ES6 in, syntax highlighting.
Also HTML bars.
Oh yeah, well yeah. I don't think anyone knows how to parse HTML bars.
Right.
Maybe GitHub flavored Markdown does, like on their actual site, but I think Rouge uses Red Carpet, so unless GitHub is maintaining that, I'm not 100% certain how up to date Red Carpet is being kept. But yeah, so we got some design. It looks really good. We managed to add an individual blog show route by using the permalink from TIL itself. We were able to get things like active state on nav links and a strange player bug with the audio player, where once we shifted from using a static file and reading them at compile time to switching over to using Ember data, we ended up needing to deal with some asynchrony. Even though we're already loading some basically fixture data, we still are dealing with it asynchronously because that's how Mirage presents it to us, so it's at least next tick. So because of that, we ended up with a situation where under certain circumstances, the player wouldn't play the episode. So we managed to fix that. And that actually brings me to a point that I really wanted to make kind of like known to the public on the podcast, is that if you notice a problem with Ember Weekend, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at Ember Weekend. We absolutely love when we get feedback because it helps us to make the site better. So if you ever run into an issue with EmberWeekend.com, just reach out to us and we will get to it as soon as we possibly can. And we'll at least put issues in, and we'll try our best to track things down. But yeah, bug reports are welcome and encouraged, and that would be very helpful for us too. So if you're feeling particularly giving and you notice a bug, just let us know.
This past Friday, Jeffrey Biles posted a blog on codeschool.io.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. It basically outlines 7 of the reasons that, to me anyways, are like the 7 strongest points of Ember. Like the reasons to use it, the reasons why it's relevant. It has to do with, its community, strong convention over configuration, and many more. And I think these points are so well articulated that it's something that if you're kind of going back and forth between one framework or another, or no framework and a framework, this might be something to look at. And if you're passionate about Ember and you want to do it in your day-to-day job, it might be a post that's worth pointing out to your coworkers or your tech lead or whatever, to kind of get them thinking about why Ember might be a really good fit. So I definitely enjoyed it. And Jeffrey Biles is super great. He does many free Ember screencasts, and I definitely encourage anyone to go who's interested in learning Ember to go there and take a look at that as well. So many reasons to go and read this blog post. Definitely encouraged to check it out. Next, we're going to talk about a kind of a rather long YouTube video with Yehuda and Gavin Joyce doing a walkthrough of the Ember source code. This, for me personally, this would have been so helpful a few years ago. It was helpful anyways, but like maybe a year ago when I was kind of trying to dive into Ember source just to kind of learn more about it. But this is something that is so beneficial. He walks you through each kind of package of Ember, and along the way kind of going down rabbit trails of interesting things about ES6 specifically and some other things. And during this time, he's walking you through the packages in Ember.js' source code from the most dependencies they have from the least dependencies to the most. So we kind of start out at Ember Metal and then go to Ember Runtime, I want to say, and then so on and so on and so on. And in each time, he's kind of explaining like the direction of Ember and kind of where they're at now and how we'll see changes over time with these things. So maybe you'll write a code like this and he's like, oh yeah, but eventually when we get to this later, this is what it's going to look like. And he ends up with this giant Scratch file that I think he opened up inside of one of the Ember.js packages, and it just ends up being like 20 lines per minute of him just like showing you really cool, like intricate JavaScript and things about simplifying APIs and stuff. It's very inspirational to see how understood a lot of the code base is, and how well understood the future changes will be. I know it's a little long, but if you watch it at double speed, it's still kind of it's recorded at very high quality. So running it at higher speed still sounds good. So I listened to it at double speed, and I feel like this is such a interesting and unique kind of look into the Ember code. So definitely worth a look. And this is one part of a series, I want to say, that Gavin Joyce has released. I think there was another one with regard to maybe Elixir, I want to say. I actually haven't seen any of those, but I saw them on Twitter. So we'll try to find those, rustle up those links, and put them in the show notes so you can, if you like that style of like get with somebody and kind of let them walk you through it and kind of talk back and forth. If you like that style of video, then this might be something that's right up your alley. So we'll try to rustle up some links and get that out to you.
This last Thursday at EmberNYC, Edward Faulkner gave a talk on basically all these things that you can stop doing in the latest versions of Ember, and maybe good new practices that you should be doing. It was a really great talk, and it covered a lot of the things we've mentioned briefly, but really in depth with a lot of great code examples. The first one of those is the new Git helper. And John and I suspected that the Git helper was something we would be using now, like much more often, but I didn't really understand the power of it. But Edward Faulkner shows a really good example where you can get some dynamic behavior, like dynamic binding, and it eliminates some complexity in code that I know I've written. So I plan on going back and refactoring to get this behavior. So the example he gave was if you're creating computed properties on the fly because you have some drop down or something that's selecting what section something is showing. In this case, I think it was a field of a form, and you were having to say something like value equals model.value, and maybe errors equals model.errors. So if you're doing this over and over and over again, you're able to just pass in a string and say, here's your model. The thing you're rendering is foo. And it was a really good pattern. I can't wait to start using it.
Yeah, I really think the strength of this talk, and we're about to talk through many of the examples here, was the examples that he came up with. He came up with very good use cases for this new technology. The case that Chase is talking about is the input, making an input helper that knows how to handle errors. And he showed a couple slides back to back where he would invoke an input, and then right below that he would invoke another input, and he would say, okay, well, I need the model, so model equals model.lastname. And then the next slide, he's like, oh yeah, well, what if we want errors? So now we have to do model equals model.lastname, error equals model.errors.lastname. And then he's like, oh yeah, and then he went to the next slide, and he's like, this slide has a typo, and like he paused, and like everyone's like slowly kind of throughout the crowd, everyone's like, oh, I see it, because he didn't capitalize the N in the last name property on the error side. And it was really interesting to see like how you can use the same kind of construct, but rather than doing it multiple times, you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to pass this thing, its last name, and then inside you say get model last name, and then when you want to get to the errors thing, you say get model.errors string that was passed in, and that using that get helper in that way allows you to dynamically do it so that you don't have to pass a million properties through. He made a point to talk about how he thinks that you should be pushing your information into the templates to be as declarative as possible. So in this case, it would be super declarative. You have like one thing at invocation, but then your component has all this logic that is no longer kind of obscured by passing in computeds and other things, but rather there's like very specific things like, okay, I see what's happening, and I can just read this template and know exactly what it means.
The next little example that Edward gave was that initializers have changed a little bit. There are certain things you can't do. Most important is you don't get an instance of the application or the container in the initializer anymore. But he gave an example of why, if that is a problem for you, there are ways to fix it and get around it and do things in other places that are actually more well-suited for those things. And he gave an example of how to move those things into services or into the right folder so that Ember's lookup system automatically finds them. And you no longer need to do a bunch of crazy things in initializers. I learned something really interesting, that you could actually put anything in any folder, and then you can do a lookup. And so the example he gave was you could create a magical folder with a file called unicorn.js, and then you can then look up magical :unicorn, and that'll actually find the thing. I didn't realize you could make a folder for anything.
Yeah, you can use the inject thing. You don't have to actually call register if it's in the right file path, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's probably still a bad idea. And the example he gave was like this unicorn is actually really a service. So this would probably move into service :unicorn. And at that point, you would just say ember.inject service unicorn.
Yeah, which I think that the more examples he gave, the more it was clear that most use cases for initializers are really just services that you haven't explored the APIs of enough. So that was really interesting. And once again, the example is a magical unicorn. So he's like 2 for 2 as of like 0.2.
The next thing he mentioned was that he's noticed that a lot of people are calling render inside of their routes to do things like render a certain controller or a certain template inside of a particular area. And we've done this in the past, and it always felt like it was a pain to get it to work right. And that actually is intentional. When you find yourself doing that, you're actually fighting the way Ember wants to be rendered, which is to be driven by the URL, and that should map to a route. And so this should your outlets and everything should reflect the way Ember is designed to be laid out. And if you're doing things like this, you're kind of fighting the behavior of where Ember wants to render. And the code he showed that would fix this was to basically move all of those renders into kind of separating them out into services, and then also creating components. And then the components can do things like look up the service they need to get the data, and you just render that component in a certain area. And then you don't have to do things like you may want a sidebar or something like that. You can just render the sidebar, and the sidebar gets maybe some user service to render that user in that area, instead of in the route having to go look up the user and then say, hey, render the user controller with this template in the sidebar outlet. So it was a really good example. It was just one of those things that now when I go to use render in a route, I'll just immediately think there's probably a better way to do this with components.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to mention from Edward's talk is he's basically saying, once again, from earlier, he's saying make your templates as declarative as possible, and push the information that is relevant. Make sure that you are spelling everything out so that it's very easy to understand. And one of the ways that he encourages you to kind of do that is to use the helper API. Helpers are awesome. They are super simple. I see constantly examples popping up from Edward and some other people in the Ember community Slack. So using this helper API is very simple. It used to be kind of confusing and a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around, and it also changed a little bit. So he mentions that the helper API wasn't always, fully baked, and very recently, maybe 1.12 or 1.11, they did a revamp, and in 2, there's Ember Helper, which has a really great API. And I think it's going to yield some really cool things. And it's possibly more performant with Glimmer than computed properties. So there's that. Although performance is usually a weak argument. So, that's kind of, hit or miss depending on your use case. And it makes refactoring easier. So if you have the example that he gave, once again, his examples are great. He gave an example of formatting price on some raw data, like from a Pojo. And if you wanted to do that with a computed property, you end up having to iterate over it in a computed property, and for each one kind of decorate that thing with another object. And that's like a whole layer of indirection that you don't need when you can just say, okay, I'll just loop over the products and then, for each product.price, pass it to the helper format price, and it works. So I find myself reaching for helpers more and more. And I have I'm kind of accruing this tool belt of helpers that I just know that I want, like concat and add and all the truth helpers for sure. But every so often formatting dates, I use helpers for that every time, or moment if I can swing that. So
yeah, one of the other good things about helpers is they're much easier to test than a component.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So you can unit test them. They because given the same input, they should basically always have the same output, unless, like he mentioned, there's some weird examples where you might want a service in a very complicated helper, like the link to or something.
Yeah, though he does encourage not to use these just as decorator methods, but rather to think about them as ways to kind of modularize your code. So sometimes you would actually potentially need a service, like you're saying, and if that's the case, then it might not be a bad idea to use a helper for it, because services are available in helpers too.
So generally, you should probably not be having services in there, but he did say that he never says never. He never says don't ever do that, because there's always a case where you might want to.
Definitely. definitely. Yeah. Well, all in all, this was a great talk, and this was one of several talks of the evening. We'll probably be covering another one in a future episode with regard to contextual components. So it's something I really think that anyone who is listening to this podcast should probably also try to tune in to EmberNYC. It's got a really great lineup, and it's very well organized, and it's an inspiration as a meetup organizer myself. Chase and I think it's just an inspiration to see like how big and healthy the ecosystem is there, and kind of get tips and tricks on how to bring a little piece of that home.
And these all end up on YouTube, right? And I think they're broadcast live.
Yeah, correct. And they're not the only ones. I think Boston also streams live. NYC for sure. Silicon Valley, I believe, but I don't know if they stream live. I think they record later. Yeah, there's a few out there that are definitely like probably want to watch every month because they're very interesting and touch on a lot of really good topics.
Thanks for listening to Ember Weekend. If you'd like to follow along, visit us at EmberWeekend.com.
Or you can find us at Ember Weekend, all one word, on Twitter, or subscribe via RSS.
I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And we'll see you next weekend.